Welcome to ONF Broadband Spotlight, and thank you for joining us for an enlightening and insightful plenary session. Today, we will hear and learn about how new commercial broadband ecosystem is thriving by embracing open source and other key tenets of open networking, such as disaggregation, SDN, and cloud technologies, powered by white box hardware and merchant silicon. My name is Aseem Parikh, and I serve as the Vice President of Solutions and Partnerships at ONF, and I have the pleasure of moderating this important plenary today. We have invited leaders of three pioneering ONF supply chain partner organizations who have each been supporting and contributing to the open networking movement for several years. I have asked each speaker to briefly talk to their company's motivation for leveraging open networking, introduce their offerings, and describe the market success they are experiencing. Following the three presentations, we will have a roundtable panel discussion. With that, let me invite our first speaker, Jeff Catlin. So Jeff, as a Vice President of Technology of Edgecore Networks, is responsible for research and integration of technology into Edgecore's open networking product portfolio. Jeff has 25 years of experience in the telecommunication industry with an expertise in networking, product architecture, and deployment. He led engineering and marketing teams in prior organizations, including Enemblanc Systems, Entrusys Cabletron Systems, and others. Having worked closely with Jeff, I can attest that his passion for transforming, the networking landscape. Let's hear from Jeff.
Thank you, Aseem, and thank you everyone for joining today. Today, I'm going to give a short presentation about broadband access hardware with a emphasis on ecosystem. That's something we talked about in many of these slides. So in preparation, I kind of stood back and said, okay, in the ONF, what do we have for an ecosystem in the ONF to develop these solutions? And of course, we have operator partners, and they help us define the solutions with their features and functions. We have support and system integration companies, which help realize bringing these solutions into the market for adoption. We have branded solution companies that work within our ecosystem. We, of course, have development engineers, and these may be from partner members or just single engineers willing to participate in an open community. And today I wanted to talk about the two other pieces of the ecosystem, which is hardware and hardware providers, and also other open source communities that help us build our products out completely. So this, of course, is a screen grab right from the ONF website, and it's a picture that we're all probably very familiar with. It's the generic SEBA architecture picture. And what you can see here is there's a lot of software pieces here. There's the NEM mediator piece, there's the Trellis software piece, there's the ONOS controller, and the Volta hardware abstraction piece. So a lot of different software pieces that have been developed to make this entire solution. But me, coming from a hardware company, I stand and look at this and say, hey, wait a minute, there's hardware under here. It's grayed out, but that's important. So I figured we'd talk a little bit about hardware today, and specifically the hardware that Edgecore supplies for that underlying infrastructure that's kind of grayed out in this picture. So we start with switches. Now the switches are used, of course, to make up the leaf and spine fabric of the network architecture that's used in not only SEBA, but many ONF solutions. And of course, this leaf and spine architecture can natively scale as needed, scale up and out horizontally, depending on the needs of the customer, depending on the speeds and feeds and overall capacity they need from the networking piece of the solution. Now, we supply switches for this solution that range anywhere from having 10 gig interfaces all the way up to 400 gig interfaces. And all of our switch solutions are totally open source, as you'll see by the little thing up here in the corner that says OCP accepted, the little logo. And this means that we have taken all of these switches that we provide for ONF solutions, and we've totally open sourced these hardware designs. So we take all the specifications, all the design files, and we totally contribute those to Open Compute, and they're made publicly available for anyone to download. And we do this to participate not only in the open communities, but to also give customers some satisfaction that there's no vendor lock-in in these hardware designs. Okay, so we totally open source all our designs through Open Compute. We offer many different types of silicon with these different switches. We offer switches with silicon from Broadcom and from Barefoot and from other silicon providers as well. So what this does is offer customers freedom of choice. So not only are they locked into a single vendor now supplying the hardware, because these designs are totally open, now they can choose on different silicon providers underneath the metal, whether they want a Broadcom, a Barefoot, or another piece of silicon, depending on their feature and function requirements. These switches, of course, support OpenFlow, which is the programming interface into these switches for the Trellis environment today, but they also now support the ONF NOS called Stratum. So Stratum is an operating system developed by ONF, and it supports next generation interfaces such as P4 runtime and OpenConfig. In addition to the switches that make up the leaf and spine architecture, hanging off those switches are the access devices. And for SEBA specifically, we currently provide two different OLT platforms. Now again, both of these are totally open source through Open Compute, as you can see from the logo here at the right-hand side of the screen. And the first one we have is a 64-port GPON OLT platform. Supports 25 gig and 100 gig uplinks out of this platform. It supports a high-performance Xeon class x86 processor, as well as a BMC controller for hardware management. The second OLT we provide today is a 16-port XGS PON OLT. So all 16 ports are capable of 10 gig XGS PON. And this product here has 100 gig, 400 gig uplinks. And again, this, much like the other OLT, supports a high-performance Xeon class processor and a BMC controller for hardware management. And in the near future, the technology is now available to produce such white box OLTs that support what's being called in the industry as any PON solutions. So all PON ports on future OLTs can be designed so they could support either GPON or XGS PON, or 25 gig PON perhaps. So you go and you pick, you buy an OLT, and then you go to the port and you configure it for the type of PON you want to run. In addition, there's OLTs that will be developed that support what's called coexistence mode. So out of a single physical port, you can run multiple PON trees out of that physical port. So you can run all in the same fiber infrastructure, by the way. So out of one physical port, out of a physical PON infrastructure, you can run GPON and an XGS PON tree. So you start to see multiple PONs being run out of a physical port over the same fiber infrastructure. And those OLTs are next and will be coming soon to the market. So we do provide some software on top of our OLTs, in addition to the low-level drivers and the Volta driver. And this is a hardware management solution that's called Redfish. It's defined by the DMTF. And our designs support that either on a BMC controller or an x86. Now, Redfish is a standard, and again, it supports modern ways of managing devices that uses RESTful APIs, HTTPS protocol, and JSON for the data format. So a modern way as compared to perhaps IPMI for doing the underlying hardware management. Open Compute is involved in this, in that Open Compute specifies the profiles or managed attributes that are exposed through this DMTF solution. So we work in conjunction with DMTF and Open Compute to support the right kind of profiles on top of our designs depending on what kind of design it is, a switch or an OLT. And there's a open community called OpenBMC, which is under the Linux Foundation, which supplies a open source NOS, for lack of a better term, that runs on the BMC controller. So this OpenBMC software runs and supports Redfish as the management entity and to expose the hardware primitives, and supports the profiles that are specified by Open Compute. So you start to see there's multiple communities here working together to provide the hardware management solution. So if you kind of step back and you say, okay, in this ecosystem of forming hardware, what is there? So now there's multiple open source initiatives being tied together here to bring these hardware products to market, whether it's a switch or it's an OLT or what have you. You know, our designs are put through Open Compute. We use Redfish as the management interface into there. Of course, we support the full ONF software suite on top of our hardware. And OpenBMC we support if there's a BMC controller included in design. So it takes working not only within the ONF ecosystem, but within the open community ecosystem to bring these hardware products to market in a meaningful way. As far as just a little bit of information on customer traction with these previous products that I went over, this is all public information, but I just assembled it here at a high level with some key names that I'm sure you recognize. So as far as SEBA, AT&T, of course, has been very public on their interactions with ONF, and they have gone through some field trials with the XGS-PON OLT that I went over. So those have been underway and have completed. Deutsche Telekom right now is in field trials and POCs with the 64-port GPON OLT that I mentioned. And finally, Turk Telekom is actually in production deployment with the 64-port GPON OLT. So there's many more POCs going on throughout the world, and hopefully adoption and deployments thereafter. But these are a few key names in the industry that I just wanted to highlight here that have been active with us on this this journey to bring this broadband access to bear here. So that was the extent of my presentation. I left some links here at the end here that may be of interest for how to get information on Open Compute and the products underneath that. Also for OpenBMC, and a link to some information on Redfish from the DMTF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. That was very nice, and that was a perfect lead into our next plenary speaker, Mustafa Ozden. Thanks. All right, so the second speaker of our plenary is Mustafa Ozden, whom represents technology company NETSIA, which also does business as Argela in Turkey. NETSIA Argela is a subsidiary of Turk Telecom, and Mustafa currently leads international sales and business development for SEBA Plus solution at NETSIA Argela. Over his 15 years at NETSIA Argela, Mustafa has played multiple roles with successive growing responsibilities, including software development and project management. He holds a BSc in Electronics and Communications Engineering from Istanbul Technical University and MSc from Technical University of Hamburg, Harburg, Germany. Mustafa, please take it away.
Thank you, Aseem. Actually, I would introduce myself as well, but you were better than me, actually. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to thank ONF for this opportunity. It's a great pleasure to participate in this panel and to be together with two important ONF contributors, Edgecore and Radisys. I will, in this presentation, introduce a little bit about NETSIA, and then I will explain our NETSIA SEBA Plus solution, which is actually a distribution of ONF SEBA. Then I'll summarize its features and life cycle very shortly to explain how we adapt open source to the real service providers world. Afterwards, I will share our lab to field experience together with our challenges and observations while working with the service providers. I'll then conclude with some operator feedback we gathered during all this progress. NETSIA is founded in 2008 in Silicon Valley. Starting from day one, we focused on virtualization of networks, SDN and FV, network slicing, both on radio and fixed access, and multi-access edge cloud technologies. We collaborated with tier 1 operators worldwide in these areas. NETSIA actively participates to open source and standard bodies like ONF, Linux Foundation Networking, Broadband Forum, ORAN, etc. What we do, we provide enriched telco-grade and supported distributions of open source platforms in a continuous manner. Actually, NETSIA SEBA Plus is also one example. It's our distribution based on open source ONF SEBA platform. It's mainly a hardened, enhanced, and supported SEBA distribution available to service providers worldwide. NETSIA SEBA Plus is field-proven. We already passed 6 months fully integrated in Türk Telekom Live Network, serving the end users with triple play services, which means high-speed internet, IPTV, and voice over IP. Actually, this is only possible with testing and enhancing the platform for performance, high availability, scalability, and security for so-called telco-grade standards. And we completed the bulk amount of implementation on the integration part with different OSS, PSS systems, legacy EMS systems to be the single management platform for the operator, and orchestration platforms such as ONF. As a unique add-on to SEBA, together with NETSIA's patented radio access network slicing technology and our vRAN solution, NETSIA SEBA Plus is a true virtual network enabling platform with end-to-end joint profile slicing capabilities. And how do we work in this open source environment, and how do we adapt an open source platform to service providers world? On this slide, it's a bit crowded, I know, but on this slide you can see a cycle actually that we continuously went through in our recent activities. This is also how we continuously develop an advanced SEBA distribution. The cycle starts with the ONF SEBA community version. We take the community code and do a lot of extra work on this code to prepare NETSIA SEBA Plus. This extra work mainly includes, but I must say not limited to, hardening the SEBA community version code to make it ready for the service provider use, adding enhanced features and interfaces like graphical user interfaces, monitoring dashboards, etc. And following developments before community, for example, the broadband API versions, we work closely with Broadcom and test beta versions, report bugs, add into NETSIA SEBA Plus as quickly as possible. Here, of course, Edgecore is quite active and we are closely collaborating with Edgecore too. We are using additional substitutional modules when existing modules do not suffice. And we really test a lot for performance, scalability, HA, security, etc. We of course, automate automate the comprehensive list of tests to make it easier. But this is a lot of effort that we put on testing. As a result of this effort, we release a version of NETSIA SEBA Plus solution. However, we experienced that the real life actually starts at the point when we deploy to a real service provider network. Actually, both for our live deployment in Türk Telekom and for other trials that we completed in tier 1 operators, we received a lot of feedback from operators and improved our solution as a result. We implemented different workflows on our solution and adapt our solution with each service provider's different priorities. For each service provider, we discussed different scenarios and completed the missing features in our solution. We integrated with different OSS, BSS systems, legacy platforms, and orchestrators. We had to overcome third-party related issues about devices and APIs that we used in live network. We solved them together with the ecosystem partner, and that was really promising. As a result of all these activities and more, which are not listed here, we gain a lot of real service provider world experience. And naturally, this improves our solution, our distribution. But what do we do with all this experience we gained? Actually, we contribute back to the SEBA community, where we based our code on. We upstream every bug fix, enhancement, and feature we implemented, and also try to pass the service provider world experience back to the SEBA community, like operator feedback, requirements, test results, etc. So actually, this field experience naturally improves not only NETSIA SEBA Plus distribution, but also ONF SEBA community version at the end. In our journey, we combined this experience we gained from production and trials with the discussion from other operators that are interested in deploying SEBA. Actually, in recent months, we're really lab to field graduation experience, we call it. And we always felt that, there's a strong and growing community in ONF together with us in this journey. And it was not only the field work we completed, several other service providers showed significant interest in SEBA. We discussed their priorities, requirements, scenarios. This was also an additional experience. And as we discussed with the service providers, we defined the potential benefits of SEBA specific to their scenarios. And we noticed that their approach to open source, disaggregation, and white boxes really changed positively. Of course, this was not an easy journey. We had a challenge there. We were always in a multi-vendor environment, and interoperability was an important requirement. For example, we implemented a new module that integrates our platform to legacy EMS platforms to overcome this challenge and to become a single management platform for the operator. Similarly, complying with so-called telco grade requirements was not an easy task. We put a lot of effort to comply with the challenging performance, high availability, scalability, and security requirements. As a result, now we are confident that we have a telco grade solution now, but requirements always change, and the performance requirements, high availability requirements always change. So it's a never-ending story, actually. We also experienced some challenges about the hardware maturity for the real life deployment cases, and these were unfortunately out of our control. However, together with the support of the ecosystem partners, we solved them and continue to solve these issues. This is also, very promising and gives us confidence about the ecosystem support in this open source world. It was not also easy to combine two worlds for us. There were rapid developments on the community side, and we also were developing all this new stuff internally. And at the end, we had to align our code with the community code and maintain a backwards compatibility continuously and smoothly. So this was not also an easy task, it was a challenge. And we had to work with different OSS, BSS systems, had to put a lot of effort on the integration. And I have one slide that will give some detail on this effort. In order to do, single management platform, SEBA Central integrates with subscriber provisioning, service provisioning, profile management, which means the provisioning of speed, technology profiles, etc., and operators' performance and alarm monitoring systems and inventory management to receive the information about the device inventory, for example. And we implemented adapter modules using different interface technologies in SEBA Central for most of these integrations. As you can imagine, the integrations differ for each service provider as well. And apart from all these northbound integration efforts, we also mostly faced with the brownfield in service providers' environment. our EMS aggregator module integrates with other vendor EMS platforms on the southbound interfaces to make necessary provisioning on them. You can imagine, each service provider EMS is also different, making this task more challenging. Overall, during this challenging journey, we observed a huge momentum towards virtualization of network, disaggregation, open source, and white boxes. This momentum and interest motivate the ecosystem as a result, and ONF community is expanding, getting stronger every day. In broadband technologies area, we also observe that ONF SEBA has a unique position, and interest in open source and specifically ONF SEBA is increasing. More operators worldwide, which are not necessarily ONF members, want to see and experience SEBA in action. This is also very promising for the supply chain members like ourselves at this stage. And I would like to conclude my presentation with some feedback we received from the operators. In general, we receive very positive feedback for both ONF SEBA platform and NETSIA SEBA Plus distribution. Service providers clearly understand the OPEX and CAPEX benefits of ONF SEBA's segregation and open source approach. BBF, Broadband Forum, and ONF collaboration is also regarded very important since the announcement last year overlapping disaggregation efforts in both communities are closely followed up by both the service providers and vendors. We see that there will be more development on this front in coming months. In our discussions with the operators, we also see that ONF SEBA is currently covering most of the service provider requirements, and the development progress shows that more and more will be covered in a short time frame. This development progress of ONF SEBA and all field activities in service providers are closely followed up by other service providers worldwide. And lastly, we observe that ONF SEBA community is attracting a lot of interest. We believe ONF is really doing an impressive job there. More operators are planning to try, test, and contribute and deploy SEBA. So we project that this year and next year will be very active years for SEBA community in general and supply chain vendors like us. And we are ready to support both ONF and service providers there. This concludes my presentation. For any queries, you can reach me via my email address. I'd like to thank ONF again for this opportunity and maybe more importantly, bringing this impressive community together again. We look forward to continuing on this fantastic journey together with you all. Thank you. Thank you, Aseem.
Thank you, Mustafa. That was very nice, and thanks for taking the invitation. We should be thanking you. So our final speaker is Rajesh Chundury. Raj is a telecom industry professional with 24 years of experience. He currently serves as CTO VP Customer Solutions at Broadband Access of the Broadband Access Business Unit at Radisys, a unit of the Indian conglomerate Reliance, which I'm sure you have seen the news lately has attracted a lot of attention from US and other international companies as investors, including Facebook and Silver Lake. Rajesh is tasked with enabling open telecom at Radisys, and before his current role, Raj spent many years at Ericsson, first in R&D and then in several customer-facing roles. He graduated from University of Texas at Arlington with a master's, and here we welcome Raj. Raj, please take it away.
Thank you, Aseem, and I want to thank ONF for inviting us to the ONF Broadband Spotlight Series. I'm also very happy to be here with my colleagues Jeff from Edgecore and Mustafa from NETSIA. And today, let's talk about what has been the Radisys journey so far when it comes to ONF's SEBA Volta open source solution, right? So let's start with talking about how we can supercharge your fiber broadband service with open and disaggregated software-defined access network solutions. See if I can get my slide going. Okay. So thank you, Aseem, for the introduction there on Radisys and how we are part of the largest private sector company in India called Reliance Industries. And here is a very quick overview of who we are as Radisys. It's a company founded in 1987, almost 30 plus years ago, in Portland, Oregon. It was the initial intent was to bring Intel Silicon to telecom. And if you see through the journey over the years, we have acquired a couple of important assets in terms of NVIDIA for our media server products, and Trillium protocol stack that I think most of us have used at some point in our careers, from continuous computing. And over time, in 2017, we made a very important pivot that is relevant for this discussion here today, which is about open Radisys. And the goal here is to really bring open, disaggregated access and media solutions using the DevOps methodology to the telecom providers, right? And in December 2018, as Aseem outlined, we were acquired by the Reliance Group of Industries. And again, it is to innovate, scale, expand, and disrupt with open solutions to bring curated, customized, and dependable open source solutions to the telecom vendor space here, or the operator space here. Let's talk a little bit about what is the problem we're trying to solve. I think most of us know this. Jeff and Mustafa have already outlined it very well. Again, Aseem set up the stage for why this is needed. But just to quickly summarize, there are about 5 or 6 issues that we see the broadband access providers, which is why they're driving the access transformation, are befuddled by, right? Number one, networks are pushed to the limits with what is happening in the current pandemic with COVID-19. We see what is happening to the fiber to the home networks that are built today. I have a chart that outlines the limit to which these networks are being pushed. But at the same time, we know that the ARPU is about staying flat and maybe dwindling at best, which means it's eroding margins. And then if you add the complexity of the lack of agility because they are stuck, if I may, in vendor silos, and as Mustafa outlined very eloquently on the problem and the pain it is today, if I may, to really bring in a new product, a feature, or even a new vendor into the OSS stack, which can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. And all of this leading into lack of end-to-end visibility and a common management system, because you have more or less siloed stacks within a lot of these vendor networks or operator networks served by the known vendors today. All of these are essentially leading up to one thing, right? The inability for mobile for service providers, fixed service providers, to really launch new services on the horizon. Let's take the example of an AR/VR application. There is a discussion going on always about 5G is low latency, it's fiber-like. Remember, it's fiber-like. Oh, what can we do with that? Oh, can we do AR/VR applications? Absolutely, they are taken off on their own. The question we now have to ask is, so why can't the fiber providers who have not fiber-like but fiber networks offer the same? Everything we have talked to the left of the slide here essentially is what's keeping them from being able to launch new services in a timely manner. So here we're going to talk a little bit about how, again, operators like AT&T, DT, and Turk Telecom, and a few others have come together under the auspices of ONF and have put together the SEBA solution that Jeff outlined in his slides. And we're going to talk about how we have taken parts of that and brought a solution to the commercial market here. Here is a very quick slide on just trying to get a grasp on how big is the problem. As you all can see, right around between March 11th and March 18th, the dotted line is a weekend, right? March 16th is when there was a nationwide lockdown here in the US. And you can see, as the chart shows, thanks to the folks from Plume Cloud, you can take any city. There's a 90% increase, an uptick in the amount of bandwidth the fiber to the home networks are carrying on any given day. To flip up a switch overnight on a weekend, right? And as you can see, it is sustained. That bandwidth consumption usage is sustained. The fiber to the home networks are taking a real beating, a real test. And as we all know, they have withstood very well. But then the question now is, how do you grow from here? How do you bring in new solutions? How do you bring in new products, new features? How do you roll these networks out to greenfield networks faster, right? Here is where Radisys has announced about, I think, 6 to 8 weeks ago, Connect Open Broadband. It is a carrier-grade, commercially hardened, scalable, secure, software-defined. The key is software-defined PON solution based upon ONF's SEBA Volta stack that is built with cloud scale architecture. And when we mean cloud scale, what do we mean? We mean writing the code using the open source code and adding our own feature set, to enable the solution to be a commercial grade solution, right? To be able to scale, which has been obviously an issue that has to be dealt with, right? And scale it to the millions of subs that need to be deployed and managed. So using microservices and Kubernetes to actually essentially have a software-defined solution that drives rapid innovation. So you can now bring in innovation in smaller pieces and in piece parts and run them as microservices alongside the existing software architecture, and eventually to achieve operational efficiency from data-driven insights. The key being data-driven insights using AI and ML. Because once you have a common software stack that is open source based from the ONF SEBA Volta stack, right? That is now used across the network. You now have a common data, normalized data that you can now use to implement algorithms to start predicting what will happen before it actually happens. Because a lot of this data provides insights into what is happening in the network and what will happen in the network. We see a lot of these operational efficiencies coming out of the open source solution. So why choose open and disaggregated? I won't belabor this. I think it's pretty obvious, but I just want to highlight them here for sake of completeness and clarity, right? It's about commodity hardware. Jeff has shown some pretty awesome commodity hardware from Edgecore. You can mix and match the elements, whether it is an OLT from Edgecore and a top of a rack switch from Edgecore, or an OLT from a different vendor and a top of a rack from Edgecore, right? The ease of integration, which alleviates vendor lock-in once you have commodity hardware, right? We'll talk about how commodity hardware is key and important in terms of some open interfaces, right? So the next step is open source software to build your own ecosystem, enjoy the operational efficiencies that I just talked about. At the end of the day, it is about giving the control back to the operators, back to the fiber service providers, where they can leverage open source solutions for cost efficient network scaling, and to innovate, most importantly, to innovate and introduce new services on their own terms, not upon a vendor A's roadmap or vendor B's roadmap, but on the roadmap of the service provider. So how do we do that? Here is a slide that just kind of talks about what exactly has ONF done and what has Radisys leveraged on top of that, right? If you see in the picture to the right, we have our proprietary vendor OLT in blue, a vendor EMS, hardware and software, all of the black lines that go between the OLT and the EMS up north are all standard ways of working, but they're all obviously closed and proprietary, and they have done well. They have served the purpose as the COVID-19 status chart showed us, right? But the question now is, does that scale? How do you bring in an alternative solution that is open and disaggregated, that allows for more flexibility, better efficient cost scaling? One of the things that we all know that needs to happen essentially is to start breaking the problem down into manageable components or pieces. And there are three pieces that I want to talk about here. Again, thanks to ONF, they have been able to abstract out the control and the management piece in terms of SEBA. And there are two key components that Radisys uses. Number one is Volta, the virtual OLT hardware abstraction layer from ONF, and the ONOS controller. The key to all this, as I talked about, is the open OLT adapter. As you have seen on Jeff's presentation, right? The Edgecore OLT, the white box OLT, has an open OLT interface. And of course, there are other OLT vendors that will hopefully over time come in and offer an ecosystem for the supply chain from a supply chain perspective, right? And from a software perspective, you have NETSIA, you have Radisys that are taking the open source building blocks from ONF And we have added some microservices on top, essentially to enable you to launch the what we call as the Connect Broadband Access Controller, the CBAC software, right? And then launch it, scale it, manage it, and obviously upgrade it when the time is necessary for going from say GPON to XGS or XGS to say 25 gig or a 50 gig PON. On top of this is the Radisys management system that a lot of the customers usually traditionally want. And if you look at the interfaces, the most important one being the OpenOLT interface, right? It is keeping the interface sacred, so it's not extended with proprietary vendor extensions is key, right? And then on the top you have REST API that are again open interfaces that we have published that talk to the Radisys management system, and from there a TM forum based API to integrate with to OSS, BSS, or the Mano orchestration platforms that will now be key as we go towards more virtualized and software-based networks. Let me talk a little bit about what has been our experience so far working with some of the customers globally, whether they're in Asia, Europe, or here in the US. It's about transforming the network at their own pace, at your own pace. That has been a key theme for us at Radisys, right? What you see here on the slide is essentially a proprietary and a distributed software methodology where the software itself, the OLT software itself runs on the OLT as you've seen in the earlier picture. Then you have proprietary interfaces that talk to the management layer, which then talk with proprietary interfaces to the OSS BSS layer. So in the discussions that we've been having with a lot of large operators, some medium and some small operators across the globe are twofold, right? Let me take you through the eventual goal or the first initial option where everybody said we will have to be, because it's natural. You take software out of the OLT and once you take it out, the question is where do you put it? Well, you run it in a telco cloud or in a centralized NFVI infrastructure, right? So as you can see in the picture here, as you take the CBAC, the Connect Broadband Access Controller, the STPON software as we call it, right? It runs in the NFVI layer. It runs along with other applications like RMS, the management system. It can run alongside with other network or IT workloads, to be very honest, because it is just microservices run as containers. But importantly, it talks over the OpenOLT interfaces to the white boxes. And you can see there are about 100 white boxes, just to give an example. And there are a couple of vendors. There could be more vendors, there could be less white boxes. The point here is that the OpenOLT interface essentially enables a centralized way to manage a network, in this case a high density network. Let's take the case of a Mumbai or a Los Angeles or a Rio de Janeiro, right? You can run them, you can run the CBAC software, have visibility across not just one OLT, but the whole network itself in this case, and now run your network in a very different way than what you're used to. An important point of feedback from the customers here has been, this is fantastic Radisys, we love it, the fact that this is open interfaces, open source based, but we got an issue here, right? We can't go from where we are to this model because there are lots of upskilling that needs to happen in terms of competencies, organizational realignment, because you are now taking a very central part, the software, the control and the management software, out of the OLT and you're running it in an IT cloud. So now how do you get the IT folks and the network folks both responsible for the uptime on a network? Now that's a jump that is a little too far. So the ask has been, Radisys, can we do this in such a way that since your CBAC software, the STPON software, is essentially containerized and microservices based, right? And in order to also address scale, right? Can you put that software right back on the OLT, on the white box OLTs, mind you, right? And then keep the same OpenOLT interfaces as you have seen on the centralized version, which allows essentially for the operators and their large engineering and operations team that are in the hundreds, if not thousands of folks, right, to be able to install these boxes, turn them up just like how they're used to in the current model, but more importantly, work on the OSS BSS integration. That is a huge first step that they want to take, right? Focus on the common management interface, the APIs that go northbound and southbound while you're running the SD-PAN software on the OLT. And over time, you can actually migrate the SD-PAN software out of the OLT back into the centralized application, or the option B, centralized control plane. And in some cases, where it is a low density deployment, it's really not cost effective to have a separate server when you have, say, a few hundred or 1,000 subscribers. It is very cost effective to run on an Intel x86 processor, right? That is on the OLT, that is very capable, and have the SD-PAN software run on the OLT and is managed in and of itself. Now, the beauty of among all this is that the software that you run, whether it is centralized, managing 100 OLTs, or it is running distributed, if I may, on the OLT, managing the one OLT, is the exact same software on both sides. There are things like these that we are getting feedback from our operators in terms of taking their journey towards enabling and deploying open source solutions. To the point my colleagues from NETSIA and Edgecore have made, there is the crawl, walk, run phase. I think we are between the crawl and the walk phase, where there are lots of trials and real tests going on, and we expect very soon that some of these leading operators will actually will be taking some of these solutions to real production deployments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our go-to-market models here. The first model is the model that has gotten a lot of traction, where the Radisys software, as we talked about, takes on the service integration and the services using third-party hardware. The customer selects the hardware, Radisys provides the software, as you have seen, and we pull it all together, including the OSS basis integration, and the customer has a single point of contact. The beauty of this is the customer gets to pick what they want, and Radisys, if I may, tightly integrates over loosely coupled interfaces, right? Not tightly coupled or proprietary, open and loosely coupled interfaces. And they still have a single point of contact to make sure that this solution works. And there is the other model where some operators are doing in-house, or they're using their incumbent SI partners, and they just want the open source commercially hardened software from us, and they're putting it all together themselves, which is a perfectly good model to go as well. Some key benefits, I will not belabor these. Obviously, a microservices architecture with an open network design enables the flexibility. It is access agnostic. The way ONF has architected SEBA and Volta, it is truly access agnostic, right? Today we can support GPON, XGS PON, and GPON2 as well. Tomorrow there might be a 25 gig or a 50 gig PON. We can bring them in without having to forklift out any of the software. We just have to upgrade a few microservices, and then you're off to the races. You now have a centralized way to manage the networks, and the ability to, what we believe, right, path to network operations is kind of key for rapid innovation and to bring in the economies of scale. Hopefully, that rounds out what Radisys has done to take the open source solutions to the operator community here. Aseem, thank you very much for the opportunity. I hand this over back to you now.
All right. So I think Raj just touched upon the impact of the COVID pandemic. So I wanted to ask both Jeff and Mustafa to start off the panel Q&A, and feel free to make this interactive. So if you have a question or a follow-up you want to ask from the other panelists, please do. I'll just start this off. So from from your vantage point, Mustafa or Jeff, what are you observing as this pandemic has kind of just spread over the last 3, 4, 5 months and seems to be still pretty much a process which will take 6 to 12 months to go down. The interest in fixed broadband and the traffic has obviously grown from residential broadband. So how do you see that impacting the interest from the operators who you talk to? Change from the time frame perspective, the technology perspective, or their focus of where they want to deploy new broadband services? So anyone start with that?
Yeah, I can start. So from what we're seeing is, we're seeing a couple things. So we're seeing, as the last presentation showed, a dramatic increase in the network usage. And as was said in the last presentation, so far the access networks are holding up fairly well, considering the amount of bandwidth increase that has happened. But, I think what we'll see over time is a slight decrease as things perhaps begin to normalize, but I don't think things will ever be the same as they were with people going back to work at their brick and mortar locations as much as they used to. So I think we're in a sustained pattern of at-home working, at least much more than was before, which is going to, of course, increase the network utilization. So I think you'll see build-outs taking shape quickly. We're starting to see more interest. We're actually starting to see a lot more interest in shared technology build-outs such as PON and SEBA because it's cost-effective and can also support, with its queuing techniques, some 5G deployments as well. So I think, you'll start to see these network build-outs happen perhaps sooner rather than later. It will be in both, I think, urban and suburban areas. And also, I think we're going to see a good round of perhaps government funding for some of the remote areas to build out proper access for all these users, that are home, millions and millions of them, to adequately, work from home and access the things they need to. So I think we'll see some government financing for some of these programs as well. And I think that's worldwide.
Correct, actually, Jeff really summarized it very well. This pandemic changed our lives, lockdown and working from home, and changed life for us and for the operators as well. We are fortunate that we have works that we can do, remotely, and service providers are lucky too, I must say. Actually, service providers really, as Jeff said, experienced, and also Rajesh during the presentation said that the data rates increased a lot. Actually, recently in a broadband forum event, Vodafone shared that in Italy and Spain, for example, the data uses, the fixed broadband usage, only fixed broadband, increased more than 50% in Italy and Spain alone. And the interesting thing is the video conferencing, because of the video conferencing thing, actually upstream data levels are also increased more than 100%. So apart from the downstream traffic that was increased like more than 40%, the upstream traffic is affected. So importance of the fixed broadband network and the flexibility on this fixed network, able to change, configure the network, able to add new services on that, is definitely underlined during this pandemic. Well, from our perspective, yes, I mean, I'm an international sales guy, and if you cannot travel, it's not easy. So we could not meet with the customers. We could not work on premise. We couldn't do a deployment in a lab. We couldn't easily do it in a live network. So it became difficult. It's difficult for the customers, of course. So we had to postpone, for example, one trial because of this pandemic. But the other progresses continued as without interruption. So yeah, we are affected, but not directly, I must say.
No, that's good to know. Good to know. And because Raj talked about this crawl, walk, run kind of phase, you are kind of maybe a little ahead of what Raj was describing, because you already have a deployment at True Telecom, which is live. And you touched upon some of the challenges you had productizing SEBA for a live deployment. But if you can elaborate more on the lessons learned when you take a solution like SEBA, open source based with a platform which is open source, into a live network. What are the things you saw, integration wise, people skills wise? I just want to understand what did you learn from that?
Well, I mean, that's a long story, I must say, Aseem, but just to summarize it, well, we were actually lucky about both the community side and the customer side. Actually, all the community all the ecosystem members, and all the Turk Telecom team, especially Cemil, Süleyman, who are your keynote speakers for this event as well. They were very cooperative during this first deployment. So Turk Telecom is also active in the community, so they understand the importance of this first deployment. So our conversations are always, fruitful, and we understand each other because we are in the same community. When it comes to the lessons learned, there are a lot of lessons learned, but just to summarize, in a lab environment, for example, you mostly focus on the success stats, and it's not always possible to see all the rainy day scenarios. However, when you put it in a live network, you see how important to have a comprehensive testing. So automating the deployment, automating the testing cycles are very critical. So we improved ourselves a lot about these, I must say. Also, you cannot really test completely how your hardware will behave in a live network. No matter how hard you test, scenarios that you cannot imagine at all happen in live network. And you really only see the maturity of the hardware in a live network. As I mentioned during my presentation, we had some issues on that, but I can say they are solved at this stage. So shortly, to be ready for the live network, you also need a comprehensive testing on the hardware itself. And there are other areas that we learned, but there are too technical, and it's about the high availability, scalability, and in fact, actually, my colleagues from our deployment testing team have another presentation directly focused on these lessons learned. So I strongly recommend the audience to see that presentation, which is more detailed on what we experienced during this deployment.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else wants to add anything to that?
Yeah, Aseem, sure. A couple of words, I guess, from me, Rajesh. What we're seeing, as I've mentioned, is that unfortunately the pandemic is a human catastrophe for a lot of us. But if there is a silver lining to all this, right, among many things, there is a push to get broadband, as Jeff I think outlined, to those underserved areas. There is a strong push now, because it's now not an option; it's almost a necessity, right? And a lot of the leading operators that we talked about, without having to go through the names here individually, right, are saying now is the time to really put the pedal to the metal and say, if the open source solutions can actually withstand the growing need for deploying bandwidth fast and quick and in a cost-effective way. So if you were to go back to the question that you've asked earlier, where is the interest coming from? Interest is coming from large operators, medium operators, small operators, primarily driven by the need to add new capacity and to add to underserved areas, and that translates into these rural areas. So if you saw my slide where we talk about centralized and then the distributed, we had a bit of a turn in our own journey as we're talking to these operators, where they're going, how do we get some of these newer deployments into the rural areas first, right? It meets their needs for getting fiber built, and they want to they need a prime area where they can test it out, right? And I think both my colleagues, Jeff and Mustafa, will agree that you wouldn't want to take this and put it in New York or Mumbai right off the bat, right? They want to try it out in areas where, if I may, the blast radius is limited. And they know that maybe the customers are a little bit more willing and resilient to growing pains. And I guess the key is to see if these deployments are cost effective and if they can scale, and if the features are close to on par with what they're able to offer with their current vendor stack and OSS basis integration. And last one is, how do these networks evolve now that they are disaggregated, right? I think Jeff brought out a good point. There's a lot of asks coming on in terms of, hey, if I were to do XGS spawn, can I put a 5G millimeter wave small cell? And if I do that, what can I do in terms of running some edge, because 5G core is all containerized anyway. It is software based, 5G core today. So the 3GPP release 16 plus 5G core has ability to serve both wireless and wireline. So there are questions coming up in terms of, hey, can we bring in applications outside of the PON itself, right? In terms of disaggregating the BNG, can we bring in any 5G core network applications to try and optimize what we have in these new deployments, where the hardware
good point there about disaggregation, and kind of the flip side of disaggregation is the operators want a stress-less or stress-free experience getting support, break fix support. So let me ask this question to Jeff about, describe the way Edgecore works with system integrators or software vendors like NETSIA, Radisys, and others to ensure that the end user of a SEBA-based solution, the network operator, has that good experience getting support when it's bringing best of breed hardware from you and software from someone else and all of that.
Yeah, so good question. For adoption and smooth transition and all those things, these system integrator companies such as Radisys and NETSIA are key, not only to Edgecore being a hardware provider, but also to the ecosystem, the community as a whole. So, we interact very closely with our partners, knowing that, and we supply them early on with hardware to get them familiar with it. We share customer traction that we have. We go jointly to customers and do presentations. We share collateral, so both of our companies are on the same page. So again, very important role that these guys play. We all want customers to get a good feeling with their first interaction with this stuff, and we spent a lot of time over the last 3 to 4 years disaggregating the proprietary solutions, right? And then also building out all those new software pieces that are needed in this new environment. So there's a lot of moving parts right now, and it's key to have someone that makes the customers feel at ease and make that transition go smoothly. And these system integration companies provide value-added functions too. So it's not always a one-size-fits-all for customers, right? So another key is they take the SEBA environment, you give it to another customer, but they have a specific function that they need to really make it work in their operational models, right? And that's what's provided as well. So again, really necessary function in the ecosystem right now, and probably one of the most valuable things for us to get adoption and get customers comfortable and move this forward.
Right.
Yeah, same. If I can add to what Jeff just said, right? We actually, I couldn't agree with him more. We actually have joint customer engagements in some parts of the world where the customer has said, I'd like to use Edgecore's hardware and Radisys your software, right? So there is not a whole lot of software can do without the white boxes, and the white boxes really can't do a whole lot without some software that will configure them and enable them to do something, right? So the supply chain partnership here is wonderful. It's nice. There is a lot of focus now on operationalizing. How do you integrate this into my OSS BSS? If I take this from the CTO office to the operations folks, right? Will they give me a thumbs up? Now you are being compared against their traditional ways of working. There are pros and there are cons. Is the new solution better than the old one? And in some cases, they're actually very pleased and impressed with what they're seeing in terms of the solution that comes as a package. The key is the package. Mm-hmm. Some operators are saying, yeah, leave it all to us, we'll put it together. But maybe 3 or 4 out of every operator that says, we'll put it together, are asking for, we need someone to put it all together for us. But here are our requirements, right? Here is our OSS requirement. Here is the white box we want to use. And here are the feature functionality we want supported in the solution. Go make it happen.
Makes sense. Right. So another question I was thinking of, and maybe this is more tuned for Mustafa or Raj, because software integrators and software providers. Both of you and other vendors who play in this kind of open networking space have built and marketed products which are based earlier on closed proprietary systems, your own IP. So now that you're going with open source platform and model, Raj talked about the go-to-market strategy a little bit, but if you can tell us how you have tweaked it from before, so that it still differentiates your offering and your services, because that's what people kind of have been pushing back, saying, "Oh, if everything is based on open source, how do I differentiate myself? How do I, so what do vendors do like you? And you've done it obviously. So how do you do that, and how does that the new go-to-market kind of work in your favor?" Anyone can take that out of the two of you.
Mustafa, you want to go first, or I can?
Sure. I mean, yeah, previously we had products, where we were licensing them with a perpetual license. And so actually from business model perspective, also for NETSIA SEBA Plus, actually the world's a little bit different, because the open source community on one side is developing things, and the things are getting developed there. And we are developing things, and we need to align this solution continuously. So from business model perspective, actually, together with the perpetual model, we are offering also kind of a subscription-based model for the operators. With this model, we ensure that they will get latest developments that happen in the community, and also our bug fixes and upgrades, etc., together. So this type of a business model approach we have. From differentiating perspective, it's not easy. All of us actually take the same code, and add our modules and different features on that. But what we do is to combine our other experiences with SEBA. For example, as I said, for example, the ready access network slicing technology was our patented technology even before we started with SEBA. So we kind of combined that technology with NETSIA SEBA Plus, and have a joint profile slicing capability now. Same can be said for our ONAP experience and ONAP integration, or the customer experience management platform integration. So these kind of combinations of different experiences actually differentiate us on SEBA.
Thank you, Mustafa. And I think, Aseem, for us, as Mustafa just laid out, the core of our offering is obviously coming from an open source distribution, right? What we have seen that is gaining traction is a lot of these operators also have to differentiate themselves from the other operator that is competing in the same space and also has the same ecosystem that they are going after, right? Whether it is closed or open. So a lot of the operators are saying, we want to create services or have a service offering that is slightly different or novel from my next competitor, right? Can you now build solutions for me that are open source based, right? Yes, there might be a small secret sauce of how they want certain service model look like, right? Of how they maybe want for their operations folks, what sort of data do you present, and how do you present it, right? How much of it is on demand, and how much of it is pull through. Again, as Mustafa pointed out, the ability to work with the OSS basis vendor stack, that's a huge ecosystem. That's a huge ecosystem. Working with them to define a common set of API. Again, vendor agnostic in a vendor neutral way. So the differentiation is coming from the ability to bring open source software that is not vendor locked in with extensions that we might add, but extensions we might add are essentially to manage the solution, but not create a siloed solution. How do you bring in 5G convergence? How do you bring in OSS basis integration? How do you bring in a key question that they're asking us is, okay, we're all moving towards some sort of a MANO solution, which includes the former OSS BSS. But they also have IT applications sitting on top that will not be replaced at a flick of a switch. How, are we as a partner trustworthy to the point where they can rely on us and they know that when they take this journey on, that they will see that we can see them through the journey, where they are taking the lead and we are supporting them?
So our assumption going in, and that's what I want you to validate, is that the bottom half of that stack, which is open source, is necessary but not differentiated by definition, right? But where you really differentiate is in the top 30, 40, 50% of the stack, which is where your integrations with OSS BSS and other things which you're talking about come to play. Plus you can add your secret sauce to enable a particular use case which is bespoke to that particular that operator or that customer, right? Right. Is that how you seeing that? And that way you are not trying to reinvent the wheel, and share the R&D by using the open source, and then focus your R&D dollars onto the top 20, 30, 40%, which is where the real differentiation comes from. Is that fair to?
Correct. Yeah. Actually, as Rajesh said, you cannot also create another silo there. This is an open source, and the nature of that is to have disaggregation and open source, and then to avoid the vendor lock-in. So you cannot, create another vendor lock-in when you, provide something to avoid the vendor lock-in. So there actually we are very careful about having all open source, open standards in the interfaces layer, everything open, and standardized as much as possible. Anything proprietary is really out of our focus, I must say.
All right, let's for the last question, and I think I would like all of you to answer, Jeff, Mustafa, and Raj. As ONF partner members, you have enjoyed this front row seat as ONF operators discussed and defined the platforms like SEBA and COMAC and others, and Trellis for their access infrastructure, right? So as a company, what value have you derived from being a top tier member, the partner status member of ONF, and what would you say has been kind of one of the big value adds? And obviously I'm asking this as a biased party from the ONF, but I would like to hear from you.
Yeah, I can start with that. So, we get a tremendous amount of value from being a partner member. So, we get a seat at the table with some of the largest operators in the world. We get to discuss with them what their requirements are, their features, their functions, what their pain points are, right? So we get to have that conversation, and we get to understand not only their short-term goals, but also their longer-term goals, where they want to be in 5 years. So we take all that and we try to put that into our roadmap of products. But in addition to just that, by being really involved and active in the community, you get to participate in a couple different other layers or levels as well. You get to participate with these operators on their initial testing and POC tests, right? And you learn a lot through a POC test, what's good, what's bad, what's gone wrong, and you fold that back into your design. And then the final phase, you even get to participate, or at least we do, somewhat on their initial revenue deployments and their production deployments, which again, you learn even another level of things that you could tweak and make better, and different, maybe a little different feature or a function in hardware or software that you could do to make things easier to deploy and faster to market for the customer. So it's kind of those three areas, the initial feature function discussions, the POC testing, and then the deployments that are really beneficial to us for having a very robust product portfolio.
Raj or Mustafa, who wants to go next?
I completely agree with Jeff. Actually, it's definitely very important. Understanding the priorities, requirements of the operators gives us really a solid ground for the solution roadmap mainly. It's always important also, very difficult to understand the customer need, and being part of this community, helps us to reach that knowledge quite easily. When also we visit to other, operators, we also see similar requirements and priorities. So in a way, we prepare ourselves inside the community for the market, and that's very important, I think, especially for the supply chain vendors like us.
You get the last word.
Thank you, Aseem. The beauty of forums like ONF, Aseem, is they are operator-led, right? We can talk about all the bodies that are out there, IETF, 3GPP, ITUT, BBF, and so on and on and on, right? Sitting in ONF, along with the operators, which are operator-led, here you're looking at the bottom line issues that that have been bothering them to date with the networks that they have built and operated, and kind of sort of feel like those problems are not being solved or addressed for some reason or the other, and are now asking in an open community, how can we solve this? That is the beauty of working with or being an ONF partner member, is not just trying to understand what do we think an operator or customer might need. We don't have to dream up of a solution and go and say, hey, do you like this? You're actually listening to the problems they have today and how it is that they would like it solved. All you got to do now is go execute on it. So absolutely, yeah. The value that we draw from is fantastic. Thank you, Aseem.
All right. If anyone else doesn't have any other things to add, I want to wrap up the plenary by thanking our three esteemed and invited speakers, Jeff, Mustafa, and Raj. Thank you for sharing your keen insights and engaging in a lively roundtable discussion. And most importantly, I want to thank the listeners, the audience here. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Goodbye.
Thank you, Aseem. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Aseem. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.